It was supposed to be another routine day. Soldiers stationed at a remote border post patrolled under the relentless sun, their bodies weighed down with exhaustion. They had become accustomed to being overlooked. No words of encouragement, no signs of appreciation, just duty, day in and day out. But then something unexpected happened. A helicopter descended, kicking up a thick cloud of dust. There were no media crews, no elaborate security detail, no pre-scheduled press conference. Only one man stepped out, walking with a purpose that immediately drew attention. It was Donald Trump. There was no grand introduction, no prepared speech. Instead, he asked a single, unexpected question. Can someone tell me how your day has been? At that moment, everything changed. Inside a high-security meeting room in Washington, D.C., the air was heavy with tension. Large digital screens illuminated the room, displaying classified reports, maps, and security briefings. At the center of it all sat Donald Trump, his sharp eyes scanning the documents in front of him. Surrounding him were top military officials, national security advisors, and key defense personnel. Among them was James Harlow, the Secretary of Defense, a man who had spent decades navigating both war zones and political bureaucracy. Harlow cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Mr. President, this is the latest assessment of our border security efforts. We've deployed additional forces to support law enforcement, but he hesitated, exchanging glances with the others in the room. There's a serious problem we're facing. Trump folded his arms across his chest. Be specific. Another voice spoke up. General Richard Coleman, the commander of the Military Border Task Force. Sir, the issue isn't just border security, it's morale. These men and women have been stationed in harsh conditions for months, some for over a year. They feel forgotten. They don't have the supplies they need, and most importantly, they don't feel like their service even matters. Trump's jaw tightened. He hated numbers and statistics that distanced problems from reality. He wanted stories, real accounts of what was happening on the ground. The media isn't talking about this, he said, his voice low but firm. I see endless reports on policies and budgets, but no one is talking about the fact that our soldiers out there feel abandoned. Harlow nodded solemnly. Sir, we've proposed solutions, but bureaucratic red tape is slowing everything down. It could take months, maybe years to see real change. Without warning, Trump tossed the report aside. I don't have time for another report, he declared. I want to see for myself what's happening. The room went silent. Even the ticking of the clock on the far wall felt deafening. After a pause, General Coleman spoke cautiously. Sir, are you saying you want to go to the border yourself? Trump stood up, his expression unwavering. Exactly. Get the plane ready. We're going today. The officials exchanged uneasy glances. A last-minute visit meant no staged welcome, no scripted speeches, just raw, unfiltered reality. Harlow furrowed his brow. Sir, with all due respect, a trip like this comes with risks. The border is unpredictable, and without advanced security planning, Trump cut him off with a firm gesture. James, I'm not asking for a media event. I want the truth. If I can't stand among my soldiers and see what they go through, I have no business sitting in this chair. A long silence followed before Harlow finally exhaled sharply. Understood, Mr. President. We'll make the arrangements immediately. Trump nodded. Good. Wheels up in an hour. And with that, he strode out of the room, leaving behind a stunned group of officials. No one had expected him to throw protocol out the window. But if there was one thing they all knew about Donald Trump, it was that when he made up his mind, nothing could stop him. The helicopter sliced through the sky, heading south over the vast, rugged terrain of Texas. Below, dry desert land stretched endlessly, broken only by narrow dirt roads leading toward the remote border outpost. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. The tension was thick, almost tangible. Trump sat by the window, his gaze locked on the ground below. He had seen maps and satellite images before, but this was different. This was real. Across from him, James Harlow studied the president in silence. He knew Trump was a man who rarely wavered once he set his sights on something. Still, the weight of what they were about to walk into lingered in the air. Sir, Harlow finally said, his voice measured, this outpost isn't like a major military base. It's isolated. The soldiers here are operating under extreme conditions, minimal supplies, brutal heat, in a constant state of alert. This is the front line, and it's not comfortable. Trump didn't look away from the window. Then it sounds like I'm going to exactly the right place. Harlow exhaled. There was no stopping this now. Seated near them, General Coleman reviewed security protocols one last time. A military veteran with over 30 years of service, he had fought in major global conflicts. But this was different. This wasn't a war with explosions and airstrikes. This was a battle against exhaustion, isolation, and being forgotten. "We land in 15 minutes, Coleman announced. "Security is tight, but there are risks. Smuggling cartels operate in this region, and they aren't afraid to provoke." Trump nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm not here to be protected. I'm here to see the truth." His words left everyone silent. As the helicopter descended, the reality of the border post came into view. A small military outpost, rugged and worn, stood alone in the vast desert. Makeshift buildings, razor wire fences, hastily constructed watchtowers. This was not a sophisticated command center. It was the raw, unforgiving front line. As the rotors slowed, the dust settled. Soldiers stood in loose formation, their faces unreadable. No cheers, no handshakes, just quiet, cautious eyes. They had seen politicians come and go before. Then Trump stepped out of the helicopter. He scanned the outpost, taking in every detail: the worn-down barracks, the tattered flags hanging in the dry wind, the exhaustion in the soldiers' eyes. A tall officer stepped forward. Captain Daniel Reyes, the outpost commander, was a man shaped by years of service. His uniform was faded, his boots scuffed from the endless desert patrols. His expression was neutral, but there was something behind his eyes, something that looked like doubt. "Sir, welcome to Falcon Ridge Outpost," Reyes said, his voice firm. Trump nodded. "Thank you, Captain, but I didn't come here to be welcomed. I came to hear the truth." Reyes hesitated for a moment, then met Trump's gaze. "Then I hope you're ready, sir, because what we're about to tell you isn't in any report." Trump's expression didn't change. "Good," he said, "because I don't care about what's on paper. I want the truth." Captain Daniel Reyes motioned for Trump to follow him through the camp. The soldiers around them moved cautiously, some glancing at their commander as if seeking confirmation that this visit was real, that it wasn't just another staged appearance. Trump walked with steady steps, absorbing everything around him. The barracks were cramped, lined with metal bunks that looked as though they'd seen better days. Uniforms hung on nails hammered into the walls, many of them stained with sweat and dust. The mess hall was small and silent, the few soldiers inside barely looking up from their trays of reheated rations. But what struck Trump most wasn't the conditions. It was the silence. "They're used to being ignored," Reyes said, as if reading his thoughts. "When no one asks how you're doing, you stop expecting anyone to care." Trump exhaled, then turned to Reyes. "Then let's change that. Let's start talking." He walked into the mess hall and, instead of standing at the front of the room to give a speech, he pulled out a chair and sat among the soldiers. The room tensed, the air thick with uncertainty. Trump leaned forward, his elbows resting on the scratched wooden table. "All right," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I didn't come here to talk at you. I came to listen. So tell me, what's really happening out here?" At first, no one spoke. Soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Then slowly, one man set his fork down and cleared his throat. "Sir, I don't know if I can keep doing this." The soldier, a young man with short-cropped hair and weary eyes, introduced himself. "Private First Class Ryan Carter, sir. I've been here for 14 months. Trump nodded, encouraging him to continue. Ryan swallowed hard. "I came here wanting to serve my country, to protect something bigger than myself. But every day it feels like we're fighting a war no one back home even knows about." A heavy silence filled the room. Then another voice broke through. "Sergeant Leah Henderson, sir," said a female soldier sitting across from Trump. She looked composed, but her hands were tightly clasped together. "I have a 6-year-old daughter back home. She thinks I don't love her because I've missed every one of her birthdays." Her voice wavered slightly. "Every time I call, she asks, 'Mom, are you coming home this time?' And I have to tell her no, because my job is to protect a fence in the desert." A bitter smile crossed her lips, but her eyes held nothing but pain. How do you explain to a child why her mother isn't there? Trump clenched his jaw, absorbing her words. Then a deeper, more weathered voice spoke. Captain Greg Dawson, sir, an older soldier said, his face lined with experience. I've served for over 22 years. I've watched good men and women dedicate their lives to protecting this country, only to come home and find that the country doesn't protect them back. He shook his head. One of my best friends, a soldier who saved my life overseas, died in a shelter last year. He fought for this country, and in the end, he was just another forgotten veteran. His fist tightened. That's what we fear most. Not dying in the line of duty, but coming home and realizing we don't matter anymore. No one should feel forgotten. Trump sat in silence for a moment, his gaze moving from one soldier to the next. Then he stood. No one should have to live like this, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. No soldier who fights for their country should ever feel like they're fighting alone, and no veteran should ever be left behind. His eyes locked onto Reyes. Captain, I need to see everything. Take me through the whole base. I don't just want to listen, I want to see. Reyes hesitated for a brief second, then gave a sharp nod. Yes, sir. They walked through the base, past the barracks, the crumbling fences, and the dusty roads. Trump saw everything. The bullet-riddled training dummies, the makeshift repair station where soldiers struggled to fix aging equipment with whatever spare parts they could find. Reyes stopped near a row of armored vehicles. Most were covered in dust, their metal frames dented and rusted. Sir, these are supposed to be our frontline defense, he said. Most of them are over a decade old. We've submitted requests for replacements, but Trump ran his hand over the hood of one of the vehicles. It was scratched and battered, a symbol of neglect. How long have you been waiting? He asked. Reyes exhaled. 2 years, sir. Trump's fist clenched. That changes now. As they continued, something caught Trump's attention. A small group of soldiers sitting around a makeshift table. Scattered across it were letters, some fresh, others worn from being read over and over again. One young soldier clutched a letter in his hands, his eyes distant. Trump approached. Who's it from? The soldier stiffened, startled. Slowly he looked up. My mother, sir, he said, his voice tight. She says she misses me, but she doesn't know if I miss her because I haven't been home in 2 years. A deep silence followed. Trump's expression didn't change. Do you miss her? He asked. The soldier's grip on the letter tightened. Every single day. Reyes cleared his throat. Sir, that's the real issue. We love this country, but we shouldn't have to choose between being soldiers and being sons, daughters, fathers, and mothers. Trump exhaled sharply. Enough. Everyone turned to look at him. The moment I get back to Washington, I'm fixing this, Trump declared. Reyes let out a small laugh, one filled with skepticism. Sir, I've heard a lot of politicians say that before. Trump met his gaze, unwavering. You won't have to hear me say it. You'll see me do it. Then he turned to James Harlow, who had been silent until now. I want a full report on everything. And don't give me another policy breakdown. I want to know exactly what we can fix right now. Harlow hesitated, then nodded. Understood, Mr. President. Good. Trump turned to Reyes. And as for these soldiers, this ends today. We're implementing a rotation system so that they can see their families without compromising the mission. Reyes raised an eyebrow. Sir, are you sure? That's going to take I don't care how long it takes, Trump interrupted. Make it happen. The room fell silent. And then for the first time in years, something shifted. A fragile hope flickered in the eyes of the soldiers. Because this time, they weren't just hearing promises, they were witnessing action. 3 weeks later. Within 3 weeks, the outpost had changed in ways no one thought possible. New patrol vehicles arrived, additional supplies were delivered, and most importantly, a rotation system was implemented, allowing soldiers to go home to their families. Meanwhile, in Washington, Trump personally led an initiative to expand veteran support programs. For the first time in years, soldiers at Falcon Ridge Outpost weren't just serving, they were finally being seen, one of my best. And for the first time in decades, a president's promise to them wasn't just words, it was action. No one left behind, no one forgotten.